Access to ultra-processed foods varies dramatically between urban and rural settings, but the end result is equally troubling. Both environments create conditions that push people, children, adults, and seniors alike, toward diets that degrade long-term health. What differs is the mechanism. In cities, ultra-processed foods overwhelm people with constant availability and aggressive marketing. In rural areas, they dominate by default, becoming the only dependable option when fresh, minimally processed foods are too expensive, too far away, or simply unavailable. These environmental pressures shape consumption patterns in ways that feel like personal choices, but are in reality responses to structural constraints far beyond individual control. And across all age groups, the consequences are predictably damaging: higher obesity rates, worsening metabolic health, and accelerated chronic disease. In urban environments, the food landscape is saturated with ultra-processed options. Fast food chains, convenience stores, vending machines, and ready-to-eat mini-markets are everywhere, often outnumbering supermarkets multiple times over. This constant exposure normalizes consumption and makes unhealthy choices the path of least resistance. Children are surrounded by advertisements and storefronts selling high-sugar beverages and packaged snacks at every turn. Teenagers leaving school pass rows of fast food outlets that offer cheap, hyper-palatable meals engineered to trigger overeating. Working-age adults rushing between jobs and responsibilities gravitate toward quick, portable foods, most of which are heavily processed. Even seniors, who may want to cook more traditional meals, face barriers when their neighborhoods offer limited access to affordable fresh produce, but plentiful shelves of shelf-stable, additive-loaded foods. Urban density magnifies psychological triggers as well. Stress, noise, and long work hours fuel cravings for convenience and emotional comfort. Ultra-processed foods provide both fast, cheap energy and a dopamine rush that temporarily relieves emotional strain. Over time, this reinforces unhealthy eating patterns and worsens chronic stress, sleep disruption, and metabolic decline. City living often means people eat while commuting, while distracted, or late at night, further increasing intake and weakening satiety signals. The combination of constant availability and constant stress makes ultra-processed foods not just accessible, but almost inescapable. In rural areas, the situation looks different, but is no less dangerous. Instead of oversupply, the problem is scarcity: scarcity of supermarkets, scarcity of fresh produce, scarcity of affordable whole foods. Many rural communities rely heavily on gas stations, dollar stores, and small markets that prioritize ultra-processed packaged items with long shelf lives over perishable foods. For low-income rural families, this creates a food environment where choosing whole foods requires long travel distances, greater cost, and more time, barriers that are often impossible to overcome. As a result, ultra-processed foods become the default, not because people prefer them, but because they are the only reliable option. Rural populations also face unique challenges across age groups. Children raised in these settings often grow up with limited exposure to fresh fruits and vegetables, shaping lifelong taste preferences toward processed foods. Teens in rural areas may rely on cheap convenience foods after school, especially when extracurricular activities require long commutes or when family schedules revolve around multiple jobs. Working-age adults, many of whom have physically demanding jobs, often consume ultra-processed meals for convenience and affordability, despite the mismatch between their caloric needs and the nutrient-poor food available. Seniors, especially those who are homebound or living on fixed incomes, may be forced to rely on canned soups, boxed meals, and sugary snacks simply because they are accessible and cheap. Health outcomes reflect these environmental pressures. Urban populations experience high rates of obesity, hypertension, and diabetes fueled by constant exposure to fast food and grab-and-go meals. Rural populations face similar or even higher rates of chronic disease, but their risk is compounded by reduced healthcare access, lower income, and limited availability of healthy alternatives. In both settings, Ultra-processed foods quickly become embedded in cultural norms and daily routines, making change difficult even when people are aware of the risks. Age amplifies vulnerability. Children in both environments establish dietary patterns early, often consuming processed foods multiple times daily. Teens face social pressures, emotional turbulence, and environments where processed foods serve as both comfort and currency. Adults juggle demanding schedules that push them toward convenience foods. Seniors face declining mobility and fixed incomes that make ultra-processed foods one of the few practical options available. Across urban and rural environments, the story is the same but told through different pressures. Ultra-processed foods dominate because systems make it easier to eat them than to avoid them. This dominance leads to predictable health outcomes, rising obesity rates, earlier onset of metabolic syndrome, heightened cardiovascular risk, and worsening inflammation. Without structural change, individual efforts to eat healthier will continue to be undermined by environments designed to push people toward the cheapest and most accessible foods, regardless of their long-term consequences. The warning is clear. Food environments, not personal preferences, drive much of the consumption of ultra-processed foods. Urban settings overwhelm with convenience. Rural settings restrict with scarcity. Across every age group, these pressures create dietary patterns that accelerate chronic disease. Until access to minimally processed foods becomes equitable and realistic in both urban and rural spaces, populations will remain trapped in a system that promotes illness long before individuals ever realize how deeply the environment shaped their choices.